Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to have this webinar conversation with everybody. My name is Glenn Wagstaff. I'm an estate planning attorney, tax planning attorney, and also have been working in the financial services field for a few years. We've grown the largest estate planning firm in the country. And one of the things that we've done is worked a lot with veterans. And we were having a conversation with our network, a few of the financial professionals, tax professionals, and legal professionals that we meet, on a regular basis. And we met on Veterans Day, that Monday morning. And we were talking about how important it is to make sure that our veterans are taken care of, that they're getting the right information so that they're making good decisions, and that they're protecting themselves and their families when it comes to the financial side of things. And so I just want to start off by telling everybody I know this is Thanksgiving week, Thanksgiving weekend, and I appreciate you taking the time with us today. Hopefully, the information we share today will be valuable for you, but I guarantee it's going to be valuable for somebody that you know. And as we met yesterday, we were talking about the things we were grateful for. This Thanksgiving season, one of the things that we're definitely grateful for is your service, your sacrifices, and everything that you do in our armed forces. And I think, I know that you hear that sometimes, maybe not enough, but we definitely want to express our gratitude. So with that, let me just share a couple stories, and we'll get into basically four topics that we want to touch on today. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about retirement planning and how that relates to your benefits from the military in terms of retirement. We're going to talk a little bit about planning for long-term care and making sure that you have the right things in place. We call incapacity planning, right? And there's some benefits that are available through the military, and there's some that you may want to supplement what you have through the military with private options, right? The third thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the importance of estate planning, proper estate planning. And in the military, you have access to the JAG Corps. I was on the verge of joining the JAG Corps. My wife didn't like the idea too much. I have many friends that did join the JAG Corps, and they do a great service. Unfortunately, they have restrictions on what they can do to help you on the legal side with documents that they help put in place. We're going to talk about some of those restrictions and some of the things that you may want to consider to make sure that you're properly protected in light of that. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of insurance and making sure you have the right coverage, and how you may want to supplement what you get through the military with private coverage, right? So those are the four topics we're going to touch on today. But what I want to share with you guys is, number one, a lot of times, military families rely very heavily on the benefits and on the options that the military provides. And don't get me wrong, there are some great options, there are some great benefits, and for the most part, our armed services does pretty well in making sure that you have people to talk to and availability to make sure that you're taking care of your needs. But a lot of times, I think there's an over reliance on just the information, just the accounts that are given to us, as benefits, whether that's through our employers or in this case through through the government. And so one of the things I know is very important to military families is self-reliance, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about self-reliance as it relates to your financial lives, your estate planning, and making sure that you're properly protecting yourselves from the financial perspective, right? So, my uncle served 4 tours of duty. Actually, I think it was 5 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan. And his family is a military family, right? He has multiple of his children, my cousins, that are in the National Guard and the reserves, and even one that served tour duty as well. And so, I grew up around him, hearing stories of of his tours in Iraq and just the different things. And one of the things that was interesting was I got a phone call from him just I think it was probably 5 years ago or so. And he said, "Hey, we'd like to meet and do our estate planning." And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, I'd be happy to help. I've been doing estate planning for many years, and of course, everybody in the family knows that at a firm that we've grown to be the largest estate planning firm in the country." And he said, "I had a will done by the JAG Corps a long time ago, but I've been hearing that it's important to have a trust. Can we meet?" And so we had the opportunity to sit down. We went through his estate plan, his legal documents, right? And we made some recommendations that he and his wife would need for protecting their family a little bit better. And then he said, "You know what? We're also looking at retirement. And, I haven't really looked at any other options. I have some savings I want to put away. And we have a couple, investment properties. And, they've done a good job of leveraging some of those veteran loans that are available to you as well. Unfortunately, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about that today, but that's a great way to be able to help build wealth. And but he says, we want to put some money away somewhere where it's going to serve us a little bit better. Can we talk about that?" So we had an opportunity to talk about that. And then he said, "Hey, you know what? I'm looking actually at potentially, retiring in the next couple years, or looking at doing some, private contracting in the next couple years. And I want to make sure that I have enough life insurance coverage for everything." Anyway, to make a long story short, we ended up helping with 5 or 6 different things. And, I would have assumed normally that all those things would have been taken care of and covered, and, that we wouldn't have even had to worry about it because it was part of the benefits that they were, relying on and looking at on a regular basis. The reality is that a lot of times we don't know where our blind spots are, right? And so what we want to share today is just some things to consider, some things to think about as you're planning around your future, your family's, financial needs, and to make sure that you're getting the support and the information that you need to make informed decisions. So the first thing we're going to talk about is retirement, right? Retirement planning and the pension that you get as part of your benefits in the military. So, you know, one of the things that's interesting, and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's very interesting and helpful actually, in public service, is that it's not a secret how much people make. It's not a secret, you know, whether you're going to have a retirement plan and how much you would make in your retirement, right? In your from your pension. It's very easy. So, you get certain credits. Those credits are then going to, determine what level you're at in terms of, your public service benefits. And then when you look at those benefit levels, it's going to tell you exactly how much you make, how much you're going to make in your pension or in your retirement. And so it's very predictable, right? And because of that, most military families know exactly what to expect. And then the question is, okay, is that what you're wanting, or do we need to supplement it with other planning, right? So this is actually just an infographic that talks a little bit about some easy steps to determine how much you would receive in your first pension fund from your service in the military, right? So the first thing that you want to look at is, how many years of service do you have? If you haven't been in for at least 5 years, then you're not eligible for any of those benefits. Step number two, if you're age 62 and you have at least 20 years of service, then that's when your pension would kick in, right? That's when it would start paying out. And so if you're 62 or older with 20 plus years of service, then the calculation for how much you would be able to receive is right here. And this is readily available online. This information is very easy to find, right? If you're age 62 and you have 5 to 19 years of service, then here's the calculation, right? You take your 3 highest years of salary, average, and then you're going to multiply that by the years of service, multiply that by 1%, and that's going to give you more or less what you're receiving, right? If you're age 60 and you have 20 years of service, right, but you're under age 62, then there's a little bit different calculation. If you're at your minimum retirement age, depending on your birth year, right, it's going to be between 55 to 57, then this is your benefit calculation. And then finally, if you're at your minimum retirement age with 10 to 29 years of service, then there's a calculation here, right? So in other words, knowing how much you're going to receive in retirement is not the question. The question is that going to be enough for your retirement needs? And one of the things that we want to look at is how much realistically would somebody need in retirement? And so when we go through this type of calculation, the first thing we want to look at is how much are you used to living on? And for a lot of us, the years that you will need the highest income are your working years. When you're paying off mortgages, when you're paying for young children to be able to go to school, go to college, all these things. So in retirement, we might not need quite as much, right? But there's a little thing that unfortunately has become a big thing, and it's called inflation. And inflation affects how much our money is worth and what it can do for us, right? And so the question is, if we were to receive the same income that we receive today, first of all, is that enough for us to be comfortable? Sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes we're not even making enough to really be comfortable. And would we be okay with that same amount of income in the future? Because if that's not enough today, is it going to be enough in the future? Definitely not, right? Because of a little thing called inflation. Now, inflation traditionally has been less than 3% per year. But recently it's increased, right? So inflation is the amount that your money is essentially being devalued over time, right? Of what it can buy compared to what it used to buy. And at a 3% inflation rate, that means that there's a little calculation. It's called the Rule 72, right? This was something that Einstein called one of the 7 wonders of the world, right? Financial wonders of the world. The 8th wonder, he called it. The Rule 72 was basically this calculation that tells you how long it will take for your money to double or for your money to grow, right? So you take however much you have, you take the number 72 and you divide it by whatever interest rate your money is growing at. Well, in this case, we want to divide it by the interest rate or the rate that our money is shrinking at, which is the inflation rate. So let's say 3%, right? So 72 divided by 3. And that tells us that every 24 years, we need twice as much money to buy the same things. That makes sense? Every 24 years, we need twice as much money to buy the same things. So, in other words, if you're looking at retirement in 24 years, you're going to need double your income to have the same lifestyle. And let's pretend that that didn't matter, right? Let's pretend that you just needed what you are making today. Well, your pension may cover that if you have enough benefits. We just talked about how to calculate that. But if it's not enough to cover what you need, then how much more would you need? So, for example, we're just going to use a simple calculation here. If you needed an extra $5,000 a month to have what you would want in retirement, then that would translate to $60,000 a year, right? 5,000 times 12. And that would translate to $1.2 million of savings. How do we get there? Because if you're pulling out more than 5% of your money every year, then the chances are it's not going to last through retirement. If you pull out 5% or less, then there's a good chance it's going to last you throughout retirement, no matter how long you live. So $1.2 million in savings is what you would need to have in order to have an extra $5,000 in retirement. So then it becomes very easy to calculate, how do we get there? How much are you going to get from your pension? right? So first we look at your pension. How much are you going to be getting from those benefits? Second, how much are you going to get from Social Security? Third, do you have any investment properties or investments that are going to spin off money for you, right? And finally, how much do you have in savings to be able to supplement those needs? And once we figure out everything combined, what your income would be in retirement, then we go backwards and we say, okay, well, this is the income we would want. And let's look at what that means with the inflation rate. When do you want to retire? How much do you need based off of inflation? And what is what we call your shortfall? Your shortfall is going to tell you how much you need to have in savings to be able to hit your retirement goals. So, in light of that, most military families need to be saving into private accounts to be able to meet their income goals in retirement. They need to supplement what they're going to be getting from the military in order to also be in the position that they want to be in when it comes to retirement. And we're here to help, right? So we have a network of financial professionals across the country, probably somebody who invited you today, and they can assist with, some of this calculations and planning. And we have options that can help you to be able to put your money somewhere where it's never going to lose, but it can participate when the market does well. So in any given investment that you have 3 ways that your money can grow. You can either have it grow at a fixed interest rate, which is usually not very impressive, but it's consistent, right? So like in your bank account, you get next to nothing. Or maybe you have a high yield savings, or maybe you have some bonds or something like that, and it's giving you, whatever percentage, X percentage, and that's what's growing for the future, and it's going to consistently grow at that percentage. Not going to change, right? Then you have, on the opposite side of the spectrum, you have variable accounts, which will go up and down based off of how the performance of your investments do. We call those variable investments, right? So if you're in the stock market, you have a variable investment. If you, if you have stocks, if you have bonds, if you have crypto, maybe you even have, real estate to some extent that's variable, but that's secured. So, has some inherent value, right? And the same thing with gold or silver. If you have gold or silver, yeah, it's variable. It's going to go up and down, but it also has some inherent value that's locked in, right? So variable will go up and down based off of whatever market you're tied to, right? And then the third option is what we call indexed investments. And indexed investments follow the market, whatever market it is, and it credits you what the market does, but you're not actually invested in the market. So that means that when the market goes down, you don't lose anything. You lock in where you're at. When the market goes up, you get to participate in the upside of the market to a certain cap, right? And so oftentimes this is a very safe, consistent sort of investment with strong returns. So those are some of the things that we can look at and decide, okay, what makes the most sense in terms of how your money is going to be taxed? What kind of account is going to make the most sense for you? And again, you can have it taxed in 3 different ways. You can either have it taxed now, which means that every single year as you earn the money, you're going to be taxed on the money. Every single year as it grows, it's going to be taxed. Or you can have it taxed later. This would be like your 401k, IRA, 457 accounts, 403b accounts, all these sort of accounts. You get a deduction for what you put into them up front, and then later you'll have to pay the tax when you pull it out, right? And it's the difference between paying the tax on the seed or on the harvest, right? In the end, you're going to have to pay more because there's a lot more there, but it allows your money to grow more over time. So it may make sense. And then the third type of account is what we call a tax advantaged account. And those accounts are where you pay the tax up front and then you never have to pay the tax again. So when you make decisions in regards to your retirement savings, you're going to decide first, how is your money going to be taxed? Tax it annually, tax it later when you pull it out, or tax advantage up front and never again, right? And then secondly, how is your money going to grow? Are you going to put it into a fixed investment where it grows consistently, but maybe not very much? An indexed investment where it can participate in the upside and not lose in the downside? Or a variable investment where you'll have more participation in the upside and maybe greater growth, but more risk, right? So that's the first thing. And I know a lot of us have already heard some of these things. When it comes to retirement planning, we wanted to give a strong picture calculation of, as military families, how we can determine what you would need in retirement. So hopefully that was helpful, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, a lot of times we imagine that if we ever have an emergency, that of course we're covered, and of course we're not going to have to worry about it, and of course our loved ones are going to be able to make decisions on our behalf, and all of those things. And unfortunately, it's not automatic that those things are the case. So, I have a lot of clients that are veterans, and we had one of them that was in, a VA hospital for a good amount of time, and their health declined to the point where they needed around the clock long-term care. So we have a veterans hospital facility that's actually dedicated towards, long-term care and helping with around the clock, nursing care. And that's the facility he wanted to go to. In spite of the fact that he was a wartime veteran, in spite of the fact that he had served, I think it was 35 years or 36 years in the military, in spite of the fact that it was a VA hospital and it was specifically for veterans, it was very expensive, not as expensive as a private facility would have been. It was still very expensive on the family, right? And so that we had a meeting, and he brought in, his sisters, and he brought in, some other decision makers to kind of help him to make the decision of what he would do, because they needed to figure out how could they use his income, his pension, his benefits, and what the VA would cover for him, and then how could they supplement it to be able to pay for the amount of care that he needed. And in his situation, he was looking for about $2,500 a month to be able to cover the additional costs that it was gonna take for him to be able to stay in that facility. Where did that money come from? Well, in part, one of the things that we were able to look at was some of the veterans' benefits that he didn't even know existed. And most veterans don't know, by the way, most veterans don't know that they exist. And here's one of the dirty little secrets, and I think it's unfortunate, but there's a lot of benefits that you may be entitled to that nobody's talking about. And one of the things that we want to help you to do is not just to be aware that they exist, but also know how to be able to claim them if you were to need them, right? So one of the benefits that exist when it comes to long-term care, and by the way, for civilian families, for those of us who are not veterans, we're going to need to plan around this anyway. Everybody needs to plan around it, right? Because they say that 72% or more of Americans are going to need long-term care at some point in our lives, right? And there's two considerations, and we'll talk about the second one in just a little bit, which is having the right documents in place so that someone can make decisions for you when you get to that point. But the first one is, how are you going to pay for that care? And on average, for the average American, it's going to be an extra $70,000 to $76,000 a year to pay for that type of care. On average, males need around-the-clock long-term care for a year and a half of their life, if they get to the point where they need it. On average, females need it for about 2.5 years, right? So do the math. If you don't have that extra money, where's it going to come from, right? That's above and beyond your normal living expenses. So for normal civilian families, the option that you have to fall back on is called Medicaid. You have Medicare that would cover health insurance, but when you need around-the-clock long-term care, skilled nursing care, you need Medicaid. And Medicaid only kicks in if you have less than $2,000 of value to your name. That means you have to spend down everything you have, whether that's your home, your savings, your retirement. They don't force you to sell your home, but they'll collect against it after you pass away if you have too much value there. And so those are the types of things that you would have to spend down to be able to even receive those benefits. Well, for veterans, there's an equivalent type of program. It's called the Veterans Aid and Attendance Benefit. And for those of you, or the Aid and Attendance Pension, for those of you who have never heard of the Aid and Attendance Benefit, this is specifically for long-term care. This is specifically for the time where you would need skilled nursing care, and it's specifically for veterans that served during at least one day of service, had to be during a wartime period. So here are some of the guidelines. If you were not dishonorably discharged, right? And if your income and net worth meet certain guidelines, just like Medicaid, the guidelines are a little bit different. We'll talk about them in a second. And if you served at least one day during a wartime period, then you can receive an aid and attendance pension benefit. And by the way, this isn't just for the actual service member. This could also be for the spouse. So if you're a widow, or if you're I think actually there's some guidelines that that are for ex-spouses as well. But it's for not just the service member; it's also for their spouse. So one of the things that's important to remember here, if you want to know whether you could qualify for this type of benefit, the first thing you need to do is you need to look and see when your service periods were. And if you're, a loved one of somebody who's in this boat, right? Because I remember sitting down with a lady, and she was telling me that her father really needed to pay for care, and we need to do some of this kind of planning. And she had to go and find his service records. She didn't have them in his stuff, and so she had to actually go and request from the Veterans Affairs to be able to get his service record and find out exactly when he served, right? But every wartime period has a designation from Congress to determine what those dates are. And the only one that's kind of strange, kind of weird, is Vietnam. If you served in Vietnam, or if your loved one served in Vietnam, then that may be a little bit confusing, because the dates are not the full time that the Vietnam War was going on. So if you served, even if you weren't in combat, even if you weren't there during one of those periods, you can qualify, even one day, right? However, during the Vietnam period, there's a gap. So there's a few years, I think it was just like a year and a half, where they did not count it. They counted it before, or they counted it after. So you have to look that part up just to make sure that you actually do qualify, right? But if you're served at least one day during wartime period, then you would be able to qualify. And then you have to be at least age 65. You have to have a permanent or total disability, or be a patient in a nursing home, or its equivalent, right? Or also, if you're receiving disability, Social Security disability, then that would be, by default, one of the ways to prove that you would be eligible, right? So this aid and attendance benefit is actually something that can be very powerful. And for this is just a reference. This is actually just from an online search, but this will kind of tell you the wartime period. So if you're looking at this for yourself or for a loved one, these are the wartime periods that you would be looking at. And again, the Vietnam era is the only one that's a little bit off, because there is a gap in there that you would have to go and look and just make sure that you fall within the time, right? So how much could you actually receive that would help for long-term care? And the good thing here is, again, this can be not just for you as a service member, but it could actually be for your spouse as well. right? And the aid in attendance benefit could be as much as $2,500 a month. And if you need it for both spouses, it can actually be a little bit more than that. And so it's definitely something that can help when you need to pay for these sort of needs. And that can be huge. That could be the difference between being able to pay or having to drain your retirement to pay. It could be the difference between being able to pay, right, between your income and everything else, along with this sort of pension, or having to rely on Medicaid to be able to pay, which would require spending down everything you have, right? And so, in order to qualify, one of the things that's important is in the past, there was no look back period as to whether you had too much assets in order to qualify, or if you were within that amount. And the amount that they look for is basically $100,000 of value. So where Medicaid says you can only have $2,000 of value, the VA says you can have $100,000 of value. However, you can transfer value from your name outside of your name and still qualify. So there are trusts that we can establish, irrevocable trusts, where we would put in your assets and then it doesn't count as yours anymore. Now you can qualify for these type of benefits. And for this individual that I mentioned earlier, we were trying to help him to get into the facility. That's exactly what we were able to do. And at the time, this was just 2-3 years ago, we were able to transfer things and get them to qualify immediately. Now they have a look back period, so it's a 3-year look back that we would have to transfer things and then qualify, right? But at the time, there was no look back period. We were able to transfer things. He was able to get into the facility. He got an extra $2,500 a month, and that was able to pay for all the care that he needed. He didn't have to drain everything he owned, and the family didn't have to supplement the costs for him receiving the care. So when it comes to long-term care planning, and again, most of us are going to need it, this is something very important to be aware of. And if you're a veteran, maybe you're thinking about, whether it's worth exploring, right? Or maybe somebody who's needing this type of care and they weren't going to be able to pay for it, right? This is not something that you're going to get a message about in your inbox, or that the VA is going to tell you that you should go and apply for very often. This is a little known secret that you would want to work with a professional that can help you to see whether you can qualify and help you to apply. And by the way, one of the things that's interesting about this is that if you're working with a professional that's going to help you to apply for these sort of benefits, they cannot charge you for that service. So we can, even if they're certified and receive special training to be able to help with this type of planning, we cannot charge for helping you to be able to qualify. And so don't feel bad about taking those meetings, right? Because somebody's going to help you walk through everything, and they're not going to charge you to do that analysis. And there may be some things you need to put in place in order to qualify. Those things may cost a little bit of money, but to actually go through the analysis, know how to apply, make sure that you can send in your application, get qualified, and everything else, that's free. Whether you work with a nonprofit or a professional, they can't charge you for that. So just something to be aware of, right? So first thing we talked about, planning for retirement. Are you going to have enough? Do you need to supplement it with maybe some private savings, right? And where would you put that? Second thing we talked about is long-term care. One of the benefits you might be able to qualify for is the aid in attendance pension benefit, right? And the second part of long-term care or incapacity planning is what we always talk about just in general, is having the right legal documents in place to make sure that somebody can make legal decisions on your behalf if something were to happen to you. Now, most of the time, if you're in the military, if you're a service member, you're used to every time that you go you go abroad, they have you sit down with the JAG Corps, right? And somebody's going to tell you, hey, if you don't have a power of attorney, if you don't have a healthcare directive, if you don't have a will, you probably need that. And everybody needs it, right? Because it's not automatic that anybody can make legal decisions for your health and welfare or for your finances. It's not automatic that anybody can do that. You need to have something in writing legally to be able to empower somebody to make those decisions on your behalf. So that's important across the board. Unfortunately, a lot of times service members don't revisit that. And we've seen situations where, we sat down with a guy, we were looking at his financial situation, we were looking at some of the things he needed. He had dementia that was starting to set in, right? And we asked him if he had a power of attorney. And he said, well, no, maybe I don't. I remember sitting down with, somebody when I shipped out a long time ago, and I don't know whether, that still exists, but I think I did a document. So then his daughter went and found it. Sure enough, he had a document, and guess who was on the document? His ex-wife was the person who was supposed to be making all the decisions. Well, at that point, he didn't want her making those decisions. Does that make sense? So we needed to update it to make sure that it was representing the right people to be able to make the decisions if something were to happen to them. So these things are important to revisit every few years. 3 to 5 years is a good kind of rule of thumb, right? But those core documents are important for everybody. And you probably have them already. If you've shipped out at all during your career, you probably have powers of attorney, financial and medical, right? But what you probably do not have is what we call a revocable living trust. And when you just do a will is good because it can give your guidelines, your specifications of what you want to have happen with your estate. And I've seen, the JAG Court does a great job. I've seen some of their documents where it's actually very detailed to say, I want to leave this for so and so and this for so and so, and I want this amount to go to, my kids, and all these sort of things. But unfortunately, the thing that we forget about is if you just have a will, your will has to go through probate. It's a process where you take the will to a court, and then the court will validate the will and make sure that it's followed and all the instructions are carried out. The problem is that probate can take a very long time. It can be very expensive. It's a stressful process, and it's a public process. And most people don't want to have to go through it. If you own real estate, your real estate is in danger of probate. You will go through probate if you don't have it structured properly, right? If you own more than $100,000 in most states and you don't have proper beneficiary designations on accounts, then that would end up in probate as well. And the other thing is that a lot of military families have lived in multiple states, in multiple places. Sometimes you even have property in multiple states. Well, just imagine you pass away and all of a sudden your family has to do a probate, has to go to court in order to, resolve things and get access to your assets. They have to go to court, and they don't just have to go to court once. They have to go to court for every state you have assets in. So they go to court in Texas and California and New York and, Virginia or wherever. And every state has a different probate process and costs and attorney's fees and delays and everything else. So the best way to avoid it is to have a revocable living trust. But what is a trust? I'm going to put up a couple slides that we use to kind of explain this. Essentially, a trust is a document that will outline what your wishes are if you were to pass away. And not only, outline your wishes, but allow somebody to step into your shoes and to manage those wishes without having to go through the court process. So nobody has to go to a judge. Nobody has to go, through a court process to be able to get permission. When you set up your trust, you set it up with a manager for the trust. That's called a trustee. And normally that's going to be you. If you're alive and able and, able to, you're going to be your own trustee. If you're married, it might be you and your spouse, right? But then if you're unable to, you become incapacitated or you can't manage things or whatever, you're going to name somebody to be your successor trustee. And your successor trustee gets to step into your shoes, manage your assets, and do what you wanted to be done with those things according to your trust, without having to go to court, without having to ask a judge for permission, and without all that hassle, right? And the only way that they are able to manage it is if your assets are in the trust. So if you have real estate, we have to transfer the real estate to your trust. If you have a business, and a lot of veterans, have businesses, which I think is a great thing, right? I'm an entrepreneur. I think entrepreneurship is something very valuable, and it's a great way to be able to, uh, again, supplement your income, but also be able to prepare for the future, right? Build a nest egg and everything else. If you own a business, you need to either have a standalone business succession plan. What would happen to your business if something happened to you, right? Or you need to have corporate documents that specify what would happen with your business, or you need to put it into your trust so that your trust can specify what should happen with it, right? If you have insurance, like life insurance, savings accounts, retirement accounts, any of these things, you need to put a beneficiary designation on those accounts to your trust so that your trust can then designate who would receive it. And the reason that, this is so important, especially for military families, is because if you sat down with the JAG is actually restricted from being able to set up a trust for you, because the way that, the government sees it, there's too much liability if they get it wrong, and the military doesn't want to take on that liability. So the JAG can actually only help you with a will. If you want to have a trust to avoid probate, you have to sit down with a legal professional to help you. And it's best to sit down with a specialist that works in the estate planning field, right? So we have attorneys all over the country. We've sat down with a lot of veterans. A lot of times, there's services like Wills for Heroes. There's, other services like that that are there to help you to know that you need something. And in the end, they only help with wills. Most veteran families need trusts. And the reason you need a trust is because you probably own real estate, or you probably have enough assets where a trust would be necessary, or you probably have minor children. And if you have minor children, they actually can't receive assets until they're at least age 18. They have to be adults in order to receive anything in their own name, right? And before that, if you leave something to them, even life insurance or something like that, to their personal name, they won't be able to receive it until somebody goes through probate, gets appointed as their guardian or conservator, receives the assets on their behalf, and then has to ask permission from the court what to do with those assets until they turn 18. And once your child turns 18, then they receive all of it all at once and no strings attached. Unfortunately, the average inheritance in the United States lasts less than 7 months. So if your child, your grandchild, whoever gets their inheritance all at once with no strings attached, what's the likelihood that it's going to last longer than 7 months? On average, that's not the case, right? So if you want that to be the case, you need to put guidelines on how they would use the assets. And you can put specifications. Maybe, Sally's not good with money. Let's not leave it directly to her. Let's put somebody else in charge to manage it for her. Maybe you have a special needs child. And by the way, the state will get involved to take care of your special needs child and to nominate itself as an interested party to be the guardian for your child, even if they're an adult, right? An adult with special needs that needs support. The state will have preference if you don't put something in writing specifying who you want to be in charge. You can also specify how the money should be spent. Maybe you want it spent just on, college, university opportunities for kids, grandkids, great grandkids. Maybe you want it to be spent on, them being able to buy a home. We had one of our clients that wanted to specify that, the inheritance that they receive is not for anything besides their own retirement. We don't want our kids to have to worry about retirement. This is for their retirement. Okay, great. You can decide those things in your trust. And then those are the guidelines that would have to be followed. And it doesn't have to be super complicated. There are ways to be able to plan around asset protection planning, protecting yourself from lawsuits, tax planning to minimize, taxes on capital gains and stuff like that. We do all of that kind of planning, but it doesn't have to get complicated. Most trust plans are going to cost anywhere between, $1,000 to $3,000-$4,000 if you work with a competent professional who knows what they're doing, right? And it's not going to be that complicated because really you're just deciding who you're going to leave in charge and how you want things divided. So we can get the cost very inexpensive. For a simple trust plan, we do it for about $1,000, but it's $1,200, right? Um, and then this is an important thing to consider because, like I said, most families have not gone through a full planning process, and it's important to do that. The last thing I want to share with everybody, and then we'll open it up just for some question and answer here in the last 5 minutes here. But the last thing I want to share with everybody is when it comes to life insurance, it's important to also make sure that you are properly covered. Now, I know that in the military, there's very good life insurance benefits. And while you're in active duty, you have some enhanced death benefits, right? And you also have, while you're full time, some benefits that are going to follow you. And even after you're no longer with the military, there's some benefits that you can plug into or that you can maintain, right? However, a lot of times people rely solely on that. And I remember sitting down with a family, and we were talking about their life insurance, and they said, "Well, if I pass away, the military is going to give me a funeral, so I don't have to worry about any of those costs." And I'm retired at this point, so there's not really a need for it. And then I turned to the wife, and she kind of had this questioning look on her face, and I'm like, "What are you thinking?" And she goes, "Well, does that cover me too?" And that's a good question, right? Because if she were to have passed away, she was not a service member, right? Um, she would not have a funeral paid for. So paying for her final expenses would be important. So that's one thing. The second thing is if he were to pass away, this is the breadwinner, right? If he were to pass away, yes, the funeral would be covered, but they still have a mortgage. How would the mortgage be covered? They had a granddaughter that they were helping to pay for college for because circumstances, right? Life happens. And how would that be covered? And then they had some debt, significant debt that both of them were on from a previous business. How would that get covered, right? And so what I want to share with everybody is how do you calculate how much coverage you should have? And then of course you look at your current coverage and see whether it's meeting that need, right? We call it the DIME method. First, the D stands for debt. If you have debt that would need to be paid off if something were to happen to you, you want to make sure that you have enough to be able to pay it off. Number two is replacement income. Now, your benefits are based off of replacing a certain amount of your income, right? And the nice thing is that, that doesn't just disappear. Your family usually will also be able to receive that. If something were to happen to you, those pension benefits still can go to your spouse, for example, right? But you want to replace your income, and if you have minor children, we recommend 10 years worth of replacement income because that'll give them the time to restabilize. It'll give them the time to be able to grow up, go through college and everything else, right? And be able to be stable during that time period. And if you're pulling out too much per year, then you're not going to have enough to be able to replace the income. But 10 years worth is about the right amount. Third is if you have a mortgage, we want to make sure that that mortgage gets paid off so that people don't have to worry about paying it, right? And by the way, if you have multiple properties and you have mortgages, it may make sense to pay off some of those because otherwise it can be a cash crunch for the estate when something happens to you, right? And then finally, education costs. And if you have children, grandchildren that you're helping with education, how much would you want to put towards that? But even if you don't, if you have a spouse that didn't really have the opportunity to finalize their education, and in order to restabilize after you pass away, they would need to go back to school. Okay, then how much would they need for their education? The combined total of this would be the amount of life insurance coverage that you should have. And a lot of veteran families are underprotected because they're relying solely on the benefits that they get from the military rather than supplementing it with some private coverage. And we talk about this all the time with people who have insurance through their employers. You never want to just rely on your employer because if you're not working there, all of a sudden those benefits disappear. You don't have them anymore. So you want to take control of your own needs, right? Self-reliance, and put these things in place so that you're properly protecting yourselves. So hopefully what we've talked about today was valuable. Hopefully you found some good information. If you're a veteran or a veteran, a relative of a veteran, this was, very specific to that audience. Um, but if you know somebody that needs these sort of things or would like to sit down with somebody to have them explained, get with whoever invited you today, and they will be able to set up a complimentary consultation where we'll go through a full analysis of your situation and walk you through what options are available and what would be recommended at no cost. And if we were to help with something, and let's say one of those things does have a cost, you'll get it at a discounted rate because you came as a referral through this presentation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just open it up for some question and answer. If anybody has a question, you can type it here in the chat, or you can type it in the question and answer box. And again, we thank you for joining us today. Hopefully this information was useful, valuable, and we're going to do another one of these in the next, I think, month and a half or so, beginning of the year. So if you know anybody that would have benefited from this information and wasn't able to attend, let us know. We'd love to invite them for the next one. All right. Well, have a great weekend. Thanks again for joining us. We're going to have this posted on YouTube so it can also be shared. But we appreciate everything that you do as veterans. Again, this is Thanksgiving week, so we are very thankful for you and for your service. And we'll hopefully talk to you soon.